Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. We're going to start a series that's going to take a long time to get through. We've got to develop a lot of ideas, and while I have written and developed a lot of this over the last couple of years, I have a lot further to go, and that is stumbling towards utopia. I'm choosing that on purpose to make myself uncomfortable because I tend to be very heavily negative, very aggressively negative on utopian schemes. One of the factors of utopia is stasis. Almost all utopian schemes have a sort of a stasis involved in how people think about it. If we just did this, everyone would be here, and it would stay that way, and it would work perfectly. And stasis is not a part of the human condition. Even when you go before the 1800s, when you look at technological curves that look like this over 2,000 years, individual lives and societies are not static. As long as people in power try to enforce a stasis, there's a growing surge outside of the borders or at the edges of society, what have you, to get development and change. People are dynamic. Trying to enforce a society into a sort of stasis is very difficult. It's achievable only at the cost of liberty and growth potential and success and wealth. So I'm not a huge fan of utopian schemes in general. So I'm going to have to develop my own just to make myself uncomfortable. But I have some very important and reasonable ideas about how governments operate within society that I want to explore through this method. So this is a very unscripted sort of introduction to stumbling towards utopia. And I'm doing it unscripted on purpose because I need to ramble a little bit. I am constantly pigeonholed. I tend to ignore the pigeonholing of the people on the far left in America who assume that I must be Nazi, racist, fascist, whatever, just because I own a gun, am white, male, heterosexual, polyamorous, whatever it might be. People tend to pigeonhole me, okay? The hammer, that thing, that's a huge racist cue to a lot of people, and it's a Nazi cue to a lot of people, and that's completely bogus. I get accused of being a fundamentalist Christian quite often, which is kind of amusing. Let's just dispense with that, okay? The whole fascism, Nazi, whatever, racism thing, that's crazy people, modern politics. But I'm often discussed in terms of anarcho-capitalism, libertarianism, hard right. None of this actually applies very well. I believe that the purpose of government is to secure individual liberty. I believe that's the highest purpose of government. It may not be the only purpose of government. There are a lot of things that people think of as a purpose of government, where government is not supposed to achieve that, but only to facilitate that. So I'm not an anarchist. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. In fact, I believe in a much more heavily regulated capitalist free market than, or regulated market, than most people on the right do. I am anti-corporate, and I have very good reasons for that. One of which is basically individual liberty. Adam Smith wrote that any time a group of people engaged in a trade, captains of industry, business owners from a certain region who own painting businesses, anytime they gather in private for merriment and amusement or not, they will engage in some form of conspiracy against the public. If you make widgets and he makes widgets and you both have widget making companies and you've got your space carved out in the market, the last thing you want is me to come along as a low-cost startup and start making widgets. And that's a problem. Anti-competition is built into market capitalism and is one of the biggest areas where you have to regulate. I digress a little bit. Politically, I am an imperialist. I am a classic imperialist. I think that... So I've been to countries where people starve people. I've seen a body... I don't like that. I think that for all of the horrors and awfulness and economic rapine of American imperialism, we do a much better job of preventing that particular sort of human crime than not being imperialist. People are very against American nation building, and I think that's because we try to hide it and we don't do it openly, honestly, honorably, and correctly. I'm going to have to get way deeper into imperialism with a script because I have a lot of stuff that I have written and thought about on this. But I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a libertarian. I can get along with libertarians to a certain extent, but I think that there are roles for government that libertarians don't see. I've read de Tocqueville, okay? I understand what American roads were like in the late colonial period and early American period before we managed to get some sort of system, government system of roads. And they were awful, okay? Freedom of travel is important. Freedom of travel is critical to an expanding, growing, advancing, healthy society. And our roads, before government mandates, before government programs, were so bad. It was sometimes easier to go alongside the road and break trail than it was to actually use the road. No, without government, who will build the roads is basically nobody, because everyone will abuse them. Yes, if you have all roads private and toll operated, and you have an infinite number of roads available, so that you can pick the best maintained one, then maybe you'll get some sort of market solution, but it doesn't seem to work in practice. We have historical evidence of that. I think the post office is another great example. I think the post office, as hampered as it is by Congress, still manages to be a pretty big success story. So I'm not a hard L libertarian. I am very libertarian minded in a lot of other ways. So how do you build a utopia? I think first you have to structure a dynamic aspect into it. I think second you need to rely on the idea of the utopia providing space for all of the weirdos who have different views on what they want to do. Most utopian schemes believe that, for example, you have your UBI utopia, post-work society. Robots do everything and everyone will happily become a Picasso and a Michelangelo. Or Leonardo da Vinci, or an Einstein. And the evidence is that that won't happen, and it's very ant-like to try to push people into that mold where everyone is going to do these things. That's not how it works. You're talking about 0.05% of the population, and it's not a matter of opportunity as much as it is a matter of inclination. Now, it's great to make sure that the people with the inclination have the opportunity, but some people are inclined to be warriors. Good news is, as long as humans are humans, we're going to need warriors. Bad news is, most utopian schemes don't allow for that, okay? They don't allow for a lot of things. They don't allow for mechanics. So any utopia that you come up with has to be a utopia that's based on allowing people to do all of their weird things and follow all of their weird paths. And part of that is going to be providing impetus, need, stress. You need to have life stress. Development, opportunities to rise up a hierarchical ladder. This is a very rambling introduction, but I need to address that I'm not politically where you think I am. probably. I'm pigeonholed a lot, and I'm not really in any of those pigeonholes. We need to talk about problems of rural America. We need to talk about planning our land use, because the fact is we have too many people. Land use regulation really is required. The simple fact is that just putting all of the land into private hands, having no government land, and relying on people to just do the things that are in their best interest is not going to work. And the Pareto principle, look, most people are just going to end up without land, and 20% of the people are going to own 90% of the land, and 5% of the people are going to own 80% of that land. So this isn't really very workable. And there's some social changes that kind of need to happen. Marketing programs you. And one of the utopian issues that people have is that, and this is a big one with libertarians, okay? Libertarians are utopians, okay? They're going to have a static free market where everything is just going to work fine and there's not going to be people hacking it and need for regulation. They're utopians. One of the problems with libertarians is that they don't know that they are programmed by marketers. They reject this. ANCAPs are worse, far worse, okay? But libertarians reject the notion that they have been programmed by marketers. So what you want in a house is largely marketing. Okay, you see these massive, huge, overbuilt, crappily built, awful ticky-tack houses on these little lots, and it's not good, it's not healthy, it's not right, okay? People are replacing life with stuff. And there's some very serious issues here, okay? You end up with people having entertainment shows about hoarders. But hoarding is it's a programmed behavior, okay? Some people go a little bit overboard, but marketers program this into you. It's not a natural state of human beings. So a lot of the factors that libertarians look at, they refuse to see the market programming that is such a big deal. And that's an area where government regulation is really iffy because we're dealing with hacking the human brain. And marketers do that. They do that with impunity. They do that all the time. And you need to realize that that is a serious issue, and that any sort of scheme of utopianism, regulation, improvement, anything, is going to rely on knowing that various agencies, whether they're government, corporate, marketing, are programming people to do certain things, to behave in certain ways, to want certain things. What do you really, really want is a long and dark road, because you may not be able to know. You may not be able to know. You may have to learn how to know what you really want, instead of being just a product of market programming. So I'm going to leave off here. We obviously have opened up this huge cornucopia of stuff to talk about. My idea, Stumbling Towards Utopia, is an exploration of ways we could structure society to allow the maximum amount of liberty and the maximum amount of human potential development with a non-static and distributed system. I think distributed system is actually a very important concept here. I think that the highly centralized, highly urbanized set of social structures and government that we're developing right now are antithetical to human nature and human potential, human ability. So, and definitely human psychological health. So, that's all for right now. Stay sideways, and I'll see you soon.